to think whether we are moving in the very right direction or there are gaps that we need to address together, the community, the government, and every player, because all of us are duty bearers and the older persons are rights bearers. They should enjoy the rights to be older persons, and everything that we do, they must be included.
Maybe, Robert, also to help our viewers now understand more the concept of elderly. We have had very many scenarios where they have been left out.
Yeah.
Even sometimes you've not had them much in the budgeting processes. There is the Youth Library Fund. We have not heard of the Elderly Library Fund. So we can first discuss what has been done before we go to what needs to be done. What has been done in the realm of the elderly?
Yeah, sure. You see, I'll keep referring ourselves to the past because Africa has a very rich culture. Indeed. Originally, we had a very rich culture that each one of us was naturally compelled to look after the vulnerable people amongst us, including the older persons. There is no home where there is no older person. None of us has a life where there was no older person, or there is no older person even up to today. So all of us are naturally compelled to look after these older persons who looked after us. And now we are here. Unfortunately, today, for many reasons, one of which is moral decadence, one parent can look after 8 children very successfully, but 8 children may fail to look after one parent. So there is moral decadence. And the older persons have been abandoned, they have been abused, they have been assaulted by their own. Secondly, while we get compelled to look after these older persons, most of their children died of disease, HIV/AIDS. Others died of other pandemics and epidemics. And so more of the older persons are there without their children, but they are there with vulnerable children who are supposed to be their grandchildren. Because by the time they take you to your grandfather or grandmother, you are vulnerable. So whoever stays with their grandparents are somewhere either orphaned or vulnerable children.
Even their parents who
and their parents, that's what I'm saying, that when your parents throw you at your grandfather or your grandmother, then your parents are vulnerable and you are equally vulnerable.
Yes.
So the older persons of the past, most of them did not go to school. They didn't have jobs, that government jobs or civil service jobs. They were just hunters, farmers. They were not even farmers, they were diggers. Because farming is more scientific. For them they were diggers, they were hunters, others were involved in witchcraft, others were just merchants of this a few enterprises, and so they don't benefit on the pension, government pensions. So they are there and they don't have a fallback position. While they would look at their children are busy migrating to look for employment. Because the unemployment problem is another problem. And so the children migrate and look for employment. They throw the children at them. So they are very vulnerable. And that is how government maybe did not take a lot of care, thinking that their children were there. It is a new paradigm that we come together 30 years ago to understand that actually, while we think the children are there, they are actually not there, because of diseases, wars, moral decadence, and talk about it, because they have even sold their land. In the older persons there would be a whole homestead of a lot of land, but occupied by relatives, sons, daughters, grandsons. They would be in the same locality, and all of them would take care of the older persons. Today, all the land surrounding the older persons has been sold to foreigners. I'm not saying foreigners who don't come from Uganda, but people who are foreign to these older persons. So they end up just being abandoned in their own households, and they can't take care of themselves. We have so many households now that are headed by these older persons who cannot do much to themselves. And I want to thank the government of Uganda that as with time, it got to understand that the older persons needed attention. Of course, after a hot discussion with the development partners who brought the paradigm and introduced it to us, to the extent that a pilot was put across so that the government can be sure whether it has capacity, whether these older persons actually need this support of the social assistance grants for empowerment.
Which many have criticized that is really
of course
very insufficient.
There are a lot of criticisms, but I think for us as Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection, we have a lot of reservations on those criticisms, that you can walk 1,000 miles even when you don't run. You can just make a step by step until you finish. So what government of Uganda has started, I'm sure if we continued to do our advocacy campaigns, would reach us somewhere to a universal social protection aspect, or a social protection for all, if we build our systems well. And so what Felix brings is very critical, that the government did not care because they thought we were there. Until they discovered we were not there.
Actually.
There is a ministry there that is for elderly. Also, when we look at this, has this really served the purpose, Honorable?
The Ministry of Gender. The Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is the bedrock for matters of social protection and also older persons. We have a whole Minister of State for older persons and people living with disability called Kanyike, Madam Honorable Kanyike. So she just got in. I hope she's passionate, because many times we just take jobs and take spaces, but I don't know. I want to wish that she's a passionate person to this docket. Because we had taken over 5 years since Honorable Madada. We did not have a Minister of State, and it has been part of our campaign, and we want to thank government for finally getting us the Minister of State. But one thing is certain, that if you looked at the budget for the last 5 years, or even more, you would see the Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development budget being perennially underfunded. Perennially underfunded. And even if we got a shock, a Wududa shock, a COVID shock, the first ministries whose budgets will be cut will be Ministry of Gender. And so we have that hiccup, that even when we have all this ambition and this anxiety that the vulnerable people will be addressed, but when there is no budget, it will all end at talking to ourselves.
Honorable, let's look at this year's theme, a very interesting one, that this time we are celebrating this day amidst COVID-19, and the theme is upholding the rights of older persons during COVID-19 pandemic, a call for action.
Sure.
We know these are vulnerable people, and let's look at how we've upholded, or how we've really helped the old persons at the time of COVID-19 in relation to the theme. How are we doing as a country?
Well, as a country, Uganda, of course, we have enough legislation. We have our constitution. We have the provisions in the articles in the constitution. We have regional and international obligations where we sign, where we are signed to the Livingstone Call to Action of 2006. We have the African Union Declaration of 2008. We have the NDP 1, 2, 3. All of them are calling on government to support vulnerable people, and they are even clearly mentioned, articulated, including the older persons. We have the equal opportunities policy. We have the human rights policy. And we have very many policies and legal frameworks to support that this country commits to investing in the older persons. And so in that case, we are very rich. But when we go to the other side, you know, the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection is comprised of members of parliament, sitting and former. And we are deliberate about this because we want an institutional memory on our advocacy campaign. And our main objective is to ensure social protection for all, to ensure universal social protection that is backed by legislation, appropriate budget provisions, and also consistent financing. That is where we stand in the advocacy campaign. And that is where government does not make up very well, because financing is an issue. I have already alluded to the fact that the ministry itself that houses the older persons docket is underfunded, and that this has been consistent. And even when some funding comes, it will be very inadequate. Parliament takes the role of allocating the appropriating budget, but Ministry of Finance will not even release to 100% of even what the Parliament has allocated. So we remain in this advocacy campaign. The social assistance grants for empowerment that government started implementing, it started as a pilot with 7 districts at first, until it became 14, until it became 15, and this went on for 5 years. We were piloting for 5 years, and we were wondering as the forum, whether piloting can take all that long before we take lessons and then we expand it.
And of course, not all the funds were generated.
And not all the funds were being released.
Yes.
Older persons would take even 6 months without payment, because the funds are stuck in ministry, and until the members of parliament stampede some of the implementations, and then the money will be found in either supplementaries or that kind of thing. So I'm glad that now we are trying to expand social protection. We have a whole expanding social protection unit in the Ministry of Gender that is implementing this. But even as we expand, there are a number of variations. The pilot districts are implementing 65 years and above. The districts that came on after the pilot, around 45 districts, implemented 100 older persons per sub-county, the oldest 100 per sub-county. And very many were left, of course, because we have districts where people really age. I want to tell you that in Paderi district, 3 years ago when we celebrated the International Day for Older Persons, there was a woman of 123 years. In Wundiwujo, there is a man of over 137 years old in this country. And so there are districts which have people who age. And so when you pick 100 eldest per sub-county, you may come and end at 80 and not come up to 65. So many will stay on. There are districts, of course, which may not make up. They don't age very well, like the Karamoja, especially the Karamoja region. You may hardly find those of 80, because I don't know why. I think we need a study there. But now, when we went the whole country, the Parliament last year resolved that we go to 80 years and above for the new districts that will come on. The Minister of Finance, at the reading of the budget this June of this year, he mentioned clearly that the pilot districts will remain at 65 years, while the new districts that will come on will be taken on at 80 years old.
That is scarcity of funds.
That is already inequitable, because the Equal Opportunities Commission will ask questions.
Yes.
There is a lot of inequity there. Why do others go to 65 and then the new ones come at 80? But we have a government assurance, because we made sure that the minister pronounced herself, the Honorable Mutuzo, on behalf of government. In the next 3 financial years, we should have come back to 65 for all. So we expect that the budget coming next financial year will cater for older persons at least at 75. So that the other budget, 70. Another budget, 65. So that we get back to universal social protection for older persons. And, well, that is where we are. But at the same time, it is not only SAGE that the older persons need. Their health rights are human rights.
More so in the COVID time, we've seen
more so in the COVID-19
being sidelined almost completely.
Yes, they were sidelined deliberately, and they were sidelined by default, because the standard operating procedures required that the requirements did not go well with them. The older person will not put on a mask the whole day. It cannot work. So they will be forced to stay at home because of the standard operating procedures. Even staying at home, is very unhealthy for them because they need to be mobile in order to be healthy. So when you tell them to stay at